2017 was the most busy year in gaming since the launch of the 8th gen consoles. Big name titles were dropping constantly, Nintendo launched a brand new console, and PC fans were showered with an overwhelming amount of new hardware. Unfortunately, many of the games I cared about and decided to review ended up being disappointments, to the point where I'm working on a top 5 most disappointing games video. But this is not that video, and it's not all doom and gloom. I played some truly phenomenal games in 2017, they just weren't the ones I was expecting. Everyone has that one genre that they just don't understand the appeal of, and for me, that genre is traditional turn-based JRPGs. Whether it's Pokemon or Final Fantasy, I cannot understand how turn-based combat is enjoyable, so when I tell you that I like a game in this genre, you should probably pay attention. Not because Persona 5 convinced me that turn-based combat is good, but because the rest of the game was so good that I was able to overlook it. I'm not ashamed to admit that I trivialized the combat by playing on easy mode, which essentially turns this game into a 60-hour-long AAA visual novel that exists in a 3D interactive space. This aspect of the game is greatly enhanced due to the massive step up in visuals from its predecessors. Gone are the awkward pseudo-chibi character models, instead we get full-sized characters like the ones seen in the Persona team's previous game, Catherine. This means that A1 Pictures' half-assed anime cutscenes are no longer a reward, but the most ugly-looking thing in the game. I also found the characters themselves and atmosphere to be much improved from Persona 4, without being as overly edgy as Persona 3. I thought most of the characters in Persona 4 were obnoxious, but I can't think of a single character I didn't like in this one. It also manages to tackle some pretty serious subject matter without falling flat on its face. I had a great time playing this game as a visual novel, and if you happen to enjoy turn-based combat, you'll have an even better time than I did. If you don't know, Nintendo has some odd policies regarding the use of their games in YouTube videos, and I'd rather not learn more about them. Instead, I'm going to be using screenshots for the 2 Nintendo games in this list, which is unfortunate, but there's not much else I can do. Super Mario Odyssey was 2017's big Switch exclusive. This was the game that got me excited enough to pre-order a Switch in the first place, and while I found the 10 out of 10 reviews and 97 Metacritic average to be excessive, this is still a great game. I found it to be a huge improvement from the thoroughly disappointing Super Mario 3D World. The beauty of this game is that it can be as insane or as simplistic as you want it to be. Odyssey's movement mechanics can allow for some wild maneuvers, and the level design takes full advantage of this. Collecting the bare minimum amount of moons to complete the game isn't even scratching the surface of what's on offer here. I take only one issue with this game: the visuals. 3D World's greatest strength was how it looked. Odyssey, on the other hand, is complete visual chaos. I know that it's probably hard to achieve visual cohesion in a game that features such diverse locations, but it's like they didn't even try. I might be alone on this, but I can't really think of a place or moment in this game that I would point to as being a visual highlight. New Donk City is a blast to play in, but it's kind of ugly if you ask me. Of course, I'll always prefer Odyssey's vastly superior gameplay to 3D World's visuals, and because it's been what feels like an eternity since there's been a 3D Mario game this good, I can't complain too much. I love Zelda games, but I have to admit that I wasn't too excited for this one. It didn't come as a surprise to me that they decided to go open world, but I wasn't too happy about it. I love Zelda for its intricately crafted puzzles and dungeons, and it seemed like the emphasis was not going to be placed on that. When I finally got my hands on the game and a Switch back in March, I played for 2 hours, and only came back to it more recently. At first, I was not having any of this game and its open world design, but once I got a Pro Controller and gave the game a second chance, I began to appreciate it for what it was, rather than hating it for what it wasn't. Breath of the Wild is structured more like a Western RPG than it is like a Zelda game, but in contrast to just about every other RPG, there is no level system, no perk tree, and there's only a few basic upgrades. This game has a lot of counterintuitive design choices. The player is given all of the essential abilities early on, and there aren't that many abilities or mechanics in the game in general. Instead of having dozens of specialized abilities that are only used a handful of times, each one of the abilities is persistently used and stretched to its limits. These design choices allow the open world to be truly open, as all of the shrines can potentially be tackled at any time without something that you haven't unlocked preventing you from doing so. This format also allows for a lot of the puzzles to be solved in more than one way. Items like fire arrows can be used to cheat some of the puzzles, but this comes at the cost of using an expensive and uncommon resource. Likewise, the bonus abilities granted from completing main quest objectives can be used as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Speaking of the main quest, it's kind of a letdown. There are 4 large mechanical creatures that you have to tame, and I get the impression that they were supposed to fill in the void left by the absence of large dungeons, but they're just too short and easy to substitute. Instead, the shrines provide the bulk of the puzzles. The beauty of the shrines is that they allow any idea, no matter how small, to be utilized without feeling out of place. I found some of the shrines to be incredibly clever, while others are just a 2-minute long joke. There's one thing I find to be kind of fucked about this game though. The Sheikah Slate. We all know that this game had been in development for years with the Wii U in mind, and it's super obvious that the Sheikah Slate was supposed to be the Wii U gamepad. The menu with items, equipment, and most importantly the map, was undoubtedly intended to be displayed on the gamepad at all times. It's curious then that the Wii U version of the game displays nothing at all on the gamepad. Nintendo has some nonsense explanation for why that functionality was removed, but it doesn't take much thought to figure out why they really removed it. The Switch has no way of emulating the gamepad's functionality, and since the game runs about the same on both systems, this would make the Wii U version of the game superior. I know this seems like a small thing to get upset about, especially since I played the game on Switch, but it's just one of those few times where the gamepad would have actually added something to a game. And just like with Mario, I find the claims of this being one of the best games ever made to be quite the exaggeration. But that's not to take away from Breath of the Wild's accomplishment of making me enjoy an open-world game, something that's become incredibly stale for me in the past few years. It also has the best combat by far of any 3D Zelda, and the visuals are second only to Wind Waker. There are some flaws that I didn't mention, but this game is still consistently enjoyable in spite of them. If you have a Wii U or Switch and didn't play the game, you certainly should, but don't go in expecting a traditional Zelda game. While Resident Evil 7's radical shift in tone and gameplay might have seemed like a risky move in the context of the Resident Evil series, I saw it as a relatively safe move in the context of horror games as a whole. It was obviously drawing inspiration from the first-person horror game wave of stuff like PT and Outlast, and after the disastrous Resident Evil 7, there was nowhere to go but up. I interpreted Capcom's thinking as Outlast-style indie horror games are all the rage right now, and as a large company, we can make a game that is of perceivably higher budget, but still appeal to that streamer crowd, and then their influence will move enough units for us to make a reasonable profit off of the game, and appeal to a new demographic since we already alienated the core fanbase with the previous game. According to the most recent information I could find, Capcom are 6 million short of their desired 10 million unit mark, perhaps suggesting that there was a flaw in this strategy. But I still believe this game to be a rare circumstance where both creativity and business strategy managed to coexist in a positive way. While it would not exist without the games it draws inspiration from, Resident Evil 7 is its own beast. It manages to break the mold and be an actual game rather than a haunted house walking tour. The first hour of this game is a PT-like experience, but after that, the game opens up and reveals itself to be more than it initially seems. There are these brilliant moments where you feel empowered, and then the game takes that power away from you without taking your weapons away. I can't get over how well designed this game is. There are so many ways in which it could have fallen flat on its face, unable to balance all the different things going on, but it never does. Combat could have ruined the atmosphere, but the odd, frantic feel of aiming prevents that from ever becoming an issue. I was just waiting for that immersion-breaking moment where I had unlimited ammo to mow down 100 molded, but it never happened. Instead, it's full of moments that change your perception of what's going on in a positive way. Just when I thought this game was about to end, it still had one more surprise left for me, the epilogue. The epilogue is completely different from the rest of the game, but it somehow manages to fit in and feel natural. It answers almost every question you could have, gives meaning to the entire game, and even cleverly ties it into the Resident Evil franchise. I loved this game, and out of all the games I put on this list, it's by far the least talked about, which is a shame. If you haven't got around to playing this game, or more likely dismissed it based off of the past few Resident Evil games, I'd encourage you to give it a chance, especially now that it's only $30. I was looking forward to Nier Automata, but I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Having never played a Yoko Taro game and knowing only that Platinum Games was involved, I was expecting a high-energy hack-and-slash game in the style of other Platinum games like Metal Gear Rising. Instead, I got one of the most impactful and innovative games I've ever played. Before I shower the game with praise, I have to mention the one problem I had with it. The new Game Plus mode with 9S that comes directly after the first 2B playthrough. The first playthrough already leaves a lot to be desired, and while the 9S playthrough does contain some different sequences, it can be a chore to have to go through some of the same stuff again as a character that plays worse than the one you did it with the first time. Since this is the only thing I take issue with in the entire game, and it serves the greater good of the narrative, I'm willing to let it slide. I just wanted to mention it because I worry that it might discourage players before they get to the point where everything makes sense, since it had that effect on me. This is a long game with multiple endings and playthroughs, and you haven't fully completed the game until you've seen the credits roll in Ending E. Alright, now that that's out of the way, holy shit, this game is incredible and you have to play it. Nier Automata is unlike anything else I've ever played. Yoko Taro takes risk after risk with his bold narrative structure and game design choices. Theoretically, it should be a complete mess, but it somehow feels sensible. A great example of this is when one of the most climactic scenes is followed up by a 10-minute long visual novel. That looks terrible on paper and sounds even worse when I hear myself say it, but it's actually one of the most memorable moments in the game. The graphics, which can look PS3 era at times, leave a lot to be desired, but the world still comes to life through its well-written characters, standout voice performances, and one of the best soundtracks I've heard since Halo 3. You can almost feel the thick, purgatory-like atmosphere coming out of the screen. The world is so futuristic and alien, yet the themes and emotions that are touched upon still feel familiar and human. In the moment-to-moment, it can feel bleak, depressing, almost nihilistic in tone, but at the same time, there's an underlying sense of hope and optimism. I've heard that the gameplay in Yoko Taro's previous games is something to be endured rather than enjoyed, but that's not the case this time around. At its core, Automata is a rather basic hack and slash, but the gameplay changes so frequently that it never becomes stale. There are bullet hell sequences, side-scrolling sequences, and even a few top-down moments as well. The way in which these different types of play are so seamlessly mixed together always keeps things fresh. Automata is a game that takes full advantage of being a game. Because of that, it's difficult to fully impart what playing it is like. You need to experience it for yourself. This is a game made for people who have played a lot of games. It's the kind of thing that I honestly can't believe exists. This was easily the best game I played in 2017, but it's also one of the best games I've ever played. If you haven't played it, drop everything and do it right now. Let me know what your favorite 2017 games were down below, and I hope to see you again in my most disappointing games of 2017 video. Until then, thanks for watching.